excited to have you, Paul, on our podcast. It is episode 4 of the Industry Leaders Podcast. My name is Maria Barova, and I am joined... Season 2 of our podcast. Yes, a very exciting and fun season ahead. I am joined by Dane McDonald, who is the founder and CEO of Clean Health. And we're just going to dive right into the podcast today. So before we get into the nitty-gritty questions, Paul, do you mind giving our viewers who may not be super familiar with you a little bit of background information on you, like your journey in the industry and where you are today and what you're working on?
Okay, high-level point of view. I've done this one like 1,000 times. When I was 14 years old, I got on a Greyhound bus, went all the way out to Oregon by myself. It was a 4-day ride. Like at 14, things were different back then. But I went out there. I stayed with this guy, did martial arts for the summer. He got me into lifting. I hated it first. After a few weeks, I really saw like my body changed really, really fast. I became really hooked. I was like, I want to do this shit forever. And then I decided then that I would do the clanging and banging for the rest of my life. And then pretty much as far as like the whole industry, fitness, anything to do with that, once the internet happened, I actually realized around that time, give or take, that I really loved writing. And I ended up being kind of quote unquote discovered by multiple like big websites because I was really just writing on a blog, and they liked the stuff that I wrote, and they asked me to write articles for them, and I wrote articles for them, and we're here.
A very brief history right there, summed up in a few seconds. I like it.
We'll talk. I did competitive powerlifting for 10 years. How Dan and I actually know each other was because growing up, Charles Poliquin was one of my mentors. I had all his books. I read all his articles, and then I had released some books on lifting. I wrote Base Building, which is when I was doing powerlifting. And I ended up...
That to your credit, I think, base lifting, really, I think that era helped kind of put the whole kind of concept of a power builder on the map, like going back over the last decade. It wasn't really, I think, 5, 7, 8, 9 years ago, a lot of people used to really kind of, you're either a power builder, a power lifter or a bodybuilder. I think a lot of the methodologies that you kind of integrated in with that, like really kind of started to fuse the two together. And you see that a lot today with like, it's very common to see, jacked dudes lifting some serious weight. And I think a lot of that comes back to some of the works that, you were doing back then.
Yeah. And that's what Charles ended up putting. I got a link one day and somebody had sent me this link. It was from Charles's website at the time. And it was his top 5 coaches for like different strength training, topics, and I was on the top 5 list of his like powerlifting coaches at the time, and I was like, because Charles was like my idol, like my mentor, like growing up as far as lifting stuff. I remember I was out Googling other Paul Carters that were powerlifting coaches at the time because I was like, he can't be me, he can't mean me. And then that day, Charles pops up, sends me a friend request. I get a friend request from Charles on Facebook. I'm totally fangirling out, and then he actually. You remember how Charles was? He was super bold, and he just pops up in my inbox, and he goes, "Hey," I bought all your books. He goes, "I love your work." He goes, "What's your phone number?" That's literally how the conversation started.
I'm right? Charles. Give me your number.
That's pretty much what he's like. He goes, "I love your work. I love your books." He goes, "What's your phone number?" That's pretty literally like how the opening conversation was. Smooth. Right, I know. And so I don't know if that works on the ladies, but it worked on me because I gave him my number right away. So, I mean, I didn't try it. I've never tried that, just sliding into a girl's DMs. Hey, read some of your stuff that you put on your Facebook and on your Instagram. I like it. What's your number? I don't know if that works, but it worked for Charles, and I sent him my number, and literally my phone just rings, and like he calls me, and I'm trying to like maintain my masculine composure, but on the inside, I'm totally like fangirling out like that. Yeah. And then Charles and I ended up like cultivating a really close friendship, and that's how Dane and I met. Yeah. Dane and I have a really good story that he doesn't know about.
Oh, really?
I want to know about it.
I was going to talk about. I remember the first time we met in Montreal back in 2014 with our Russian friend.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a multitude. Can we talk about some of those stories? Because those are so good.
No, I mean, let's do it.
All right. These are really good. These are some. I've told these stories at some of my workshops since, and people think they're amazing. They're hilarious. So
Let's do it.
back in that time, and I knew he's still popular, but I think Dmitry was still kind of at his peak at that time in terms of popularity.
He was the shit back then, wasn't he? Like, you know,
Right.
he was getting like, oh, by all the
Right. He was like, it was like God status,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Dmitry
he
was
was.
like God status.
Yeah.
Do you know, Marie, you know who Dmitry Klokov is?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I wonder if I'm about to burst her bubble a bit, Dave.
It's all right.
You
Burst,
might.
burst, burst away.
I'm listening. Yeah.
Okay, do you remember what happened that morning at breakfast, though? What I'm about to talk about? Remember that conversation? Okay, so I was rewind about so many months, I don't know. I was at the Arnold, and I saw my friend Brian Carroll and his wife, and we were talking, and it was in Caesar's Palace, and Rita, his wife, goes, "Did you get to meet Dmitry Klokov?" And I go, "No." And she looks at me and she goes, "He's really ugly in person." And I go, "What?" And Brian Carroll was like, she goes, "It was the most disappointing moment of my life." She's like, because like in pictures, he's like, you know, like so
Adonis.
good looking. And you think, right, dates, like tell us a true ass story.
Yeah.
So I'm telling this story and I'm horrible with name. Your wife's name is it Laura or Lauren? I want to
Lauren,
get sure.
yeah.
Lauren. Okay. So we're sitting there and I'm telling this story at breakfast, me and Dane and Lauren sitting there. And so she's like, "I don't believe that." And Dimitri's literally on his way down to breakfast. And this, like, as I'm telling the story, I'm like, "I'm just telling you what I heard." She said he's really tall and like he's got like really like prominent bone structure, like a big caveman forehead, and like,
You know,
he's like, I'm telling
Ed
you,
Cohen hands.
right. So Dmitry comes down and he's standing there and I'm looking at him like, wow, she's right. He's not attractive at all in person. And so I turn and look at Lauren and she said, and she goes, and I'm like, it was just so funny because I was like, and he turns like Dmitry trying to he's like a great guy. Once he opens up and he gets a little warm, like he's a great guy. But he's really photogenic, and I don't want to be mean, but like he's ugly in person. But he's one of those people like he's got really striking, sharp features. I think you can see that Maria's like totally not happy about this conversation.
My heart is broken.
Like she's really not happy about this conversation. So, but they tell her that really happened. It's really true. So he's got really striking features, which comes across like great in pictures, but in person, like he's like his head's like real this big in person. Like
if him and I were sitting in the same position right now, you wouldn't see the water behind me. You'd just see a head. You know, a really serious Russian-looking one. But it's saying that, like, you know, Dmitry is a super cool guy. Like, you know, him and I still, you know, communicate from time to time. And I mean, that guy, I remember, like, I spent a lot of time traveling around the world with him to different workshops. And, you know, this guy, like, I remember coming back from Montreal, Paul, in that workshop where we first met. And I think we got on at LA, you know, it was about 10:30 at night flight to Sydney. And so we arrived the next day in Sydney at like 8 a.m. to a workshop that we were holding at my gym, you know, the one that you actually came out to with John the following year. And that workshop started at 10 o'clock, right? So Dmitry gets off the plane. I'm like, "Oh, so do you want to go get breakfast?" He's like, "No, I don't need breakfast." You remember that guy? He wouldn't eat.
I don't need breakfast. I just drink Diet Coke.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, Diet Coke.
Yeah,
and he would basically fast, you know. And I remember he coming off the plane, you know, and he gets into the workshop at 10 o'clock. He's sweating like he'd been having vodka on the plane and shit like that. And you know, he's got 180 kilos on the bar snatching it.
Yeah,
you know, 100. You know, if you go to the recent Olympics, you know what they're doing in the like. You know, it's just insane what the type of feats of strength that this guy
we had at that one morning. I still talk about one of the most freakish things I ever saw was we had a long drive out from where we were staying in the hotel to where we were doing
Atlanta. Yeah,
right. Yeah. And so Dmitry would sleep the whole way in the car, and then get out and then drink a Coke. And then he like did a couple of warm up sets, and then did a clean of 440 and put like a push press with it, and be like, okay, that's good. And then like that would be like it was just really, I'm like, you never seen anything like it. It's not just about the weight on the. It was not just about like the weight, but it was all the circumstances around it. Like it's just like he could just get out of the car after sleeping for 45 minutes. Drink a Coke, and then do a couple warm-up sets, and then do stuff like only 1% of the people in the world could do. Like really, really weird.
Then it'd be like, now you try.
Yeah, right. Yes, and then so the other funny story that I tell from that time. This is the best one, because this one always tears the house down. Do you remember? I used to I tell all these jokes, and Dmitry, like, because he's so stoic and. Yes, he's Russian. He's super Russian.
He's Russian.
So I love to tell anti-jokes, and Charles loved my jokes. Me and Charles had the same sense of humor, so Charles would be in tears. And Dmitry wouldn't bat an eye. And he did not understand jokes, the American jokes, because he goes, in Russia, if you try to be like this, we just stab you with a knife. And okay, but that's not what we do here. And
in Russia, we not smile at you. You know,
we don't smile. I don't know why you smile like that.
We never smile.
Sometimes in Russia, if someone smiles at you, you just punch them in the face, and that's it.
You smile, you go to Siberia.
So I'm telling Dmitry trying to tell him these jokes, and he does not get it. And they're anti-jokes, so I would be like, what's red and smells like blue paint? And I would look at him, and he would just wouldn't say anything. And I'd be like, what's red and smells like blue paint? And he would just look at me. I go, red paint. And then like he would just look at me for a long time. And most people don't get anti-jokes, but I think they're amazing. Charles would be like in tears. Yeah. But me and you and Lauren was going back to Dimitri's in the back, and I go, okay, Dmitry, let's try this again. What's red and bad for your teeth? And he would just look at me, and I go, you're supposed to say what? And he'd go, what? And I would say, because that's how the joke works. I ask like you that question, and you respond back. And he just look at me, and I go, okay, let's try this again. What is red and bad for your teeth? And he wouldn't say anything. And I would go, you got to say what? And he'd go, why? And I go, that's how the interaction and the joke works. And so I asked him again, I said, what's red and bad for your teeth? And then Lauren goes, just say what, Dmitry? And he goes, what? And I go, a brick. And so he goes, I don't understand your jokes. They don't make sense to me. I don't get it. So I'm like, how do you not understand that? How do you understand the joke? The next day, we were at lunch, and you remember he would always eat a big lunch. So he would do that fasting thing and eat like the big lunch. Yeah. So he's eating all this pasta.
Because if he ate over, I remember him saying like if he ate too much food, he'd put on too much muscle. You know, because he was like the human anabolic machine.
Right. So he did say that. He was like, if I eat too much, you grow too much muscle, and I cannot move. And so I'm like, that must be terrible.
250 pounds, 2% body fat.
Yeah. So we're sitting at lunch the next day, and we're having this conversation. Dimitri's he was in a good mood. He was eating all this pasta. I remember he was eating all this pasta. And that was the lunch where he's trying to order that cook. And she's like, what's the giant cock? And you made a joke. I don't remember what your joke was. It was really good. And so he's eating this pasta. And he's actually in a good mood. And he looks at me and he goes, Paul, I was thinking about your joke last night. It's red, bad for teeth, brick. I get it. It's so hilarious. And the whole table just busted out laughing. And I have laughed about that for like probably 10 years now. And I thought of Dmitry laying in the bed in the hotel room in the dark, trying to figure out why a brick was bad for your teeth, right?
Oh my gosh.
Gosh, those were some good times, man. Those are some good times.
So there's another one. So here was the other thing. So one night, me and Dmitry, we had dinner together. It was his last night there. It was just me and him. And we drank. He loved to drink wine, so he's like, "You're going to drink wine." He didn't drink vodka; he drank wine. He's like, "You will drink wine with me." So he ordered wine, and we were just like drinking wine. He's in a good mood. It's last night there, and he's talking about all the money he's made and stuff. And I get pretty lit, and you ended up texting me. You're like, "Hey, we're down here having some drinks, and like, you want to come down and hang out?" I'm like, "Sure." And I was like, I came down, and Do you remember who was sitting in the booth next to us?
Yeah, the blonde. Oh, I'm trying to remember. She was Australian, wasn't she?
Yep. Yep.
Remind me now. You're taking me down memory
So
lane.
I'm gonna say it. You're gonna be like, oh gosh. So I was pretty lit at this point.
Yeah,
So you go, do you know who that is over there? And I go, nope. And you go, that's Sarah Allen.
that's right. Yes, that's right.
Right. And you're like, oh, that's Sarah Allen. And I go, okay. I didn't know who she was. She had like 1 million followers at the time. I think it was on
Yeah, yeah,
Facebook.
yeah,
So
yeah.
she was like, at the time, she was like probably the most famous bikini model out of Australia.
She was like the Lauren Simpson of that era.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he goes, that's Sarah Allen. I'm like, okay. And so you go, do you want me to introduce you to her? And I'm like, I don't care. I was pretty lit by that point. I don't know if you remember this, but you turned and you were talking to her and you were like, hey Sarah, this is Paul Carter. So I got up to shake her hand and I fell over the table, like almost into her.
I could picture this now.
Yeah. But I like so then she asked me to go shopping with her the next day, and he's like, I don't think you know all this. Like she asked me to go shopping with her the next
No.
day, and we went shopping together, and like Sarah was beautiful, like incredibly beautiful. Like she and I remember sitting there thinking, I feel like that there's kind of something going on between me and this girl, but I don't know if she's like into me because she was kind of like next level, like hot. And then we were having lunch, and I remember that the check came, and I was like, I got it. She's like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, it's no big deal. I got it. She goes, okay. She goes, well, I'll get dinner tonight. And it was one of those like, like yes moments as a guy, you know what I mean? Like one of those like fist pump. Like, did she just? Yeah, she just said that right there. That's right. That's like internal. But I was cool about it. I was cool about it. And her and I kind of had an on and off romance for quite a few years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
after that.
I didn't know that, mate. I didn't know that, but
Yeah, I know. So I was saying you didn't know that. Her and
oh
I had
no.
an on and off romance after that for quite a few years. She is an amazing person, though. Can't say enough good things about her. She's a very sweet person. So I
Mm,
have nothing but love for her.
mm.
So yeah, so that I just think it was cool, like that we had that connection, and because
Some
when I
good
came
times,
out,
man. Some good times.
yeah, it was. It was a lot of good times. I made a lot of good times when I came out, actually, and for when me and John were doing the when we were doing the workshop out there, like I saw her then, but like we weren't good. And then I ended up leaving. She moved to the States, and then we actually ended up we ended up like spending some time together here or there. When we would be between relationships, we would end up calling each other. She'd be like, "Are you single?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, you want to hang out?" I'm like, "Sure." So that'd be pretty cool. But she's a cool chick.
Awesome, man. Well, I was going to say, so like in terms of, gosh, we kind of lost our train of thought. I'll pass it over to you, Maria.
Yeah, so we're gonna deter right back into one question that I have for you is
Okay, I
going
can
back.
tell she's had like ants in her pants to get this question out, whatever it is.
Well, I've been listening to these hilarious stories that I have FOMO of not being a part of any of them. So we're gonna give our listeners a little bit more insight on your training brain. But
Okay.
keep the stories coming if you have any more on you. But what would you say in terms of your training? What led you to powerlifting over bodybuilding? And when did you start training?
I started training when I was 14.
Same.
Okay. But I think I'm probably a little older than you are. So,
Yes.
yes. So, I started training when I was 14, and my initial love of training was bodybuilding.
Mm.
Was bodybuilding. So, like my early influences were Dorian Yates and Mike Mincer, and those guys were still like they were like my bread and butter in terms of training philosophy early on. Training very hard and getting the most out of your training and having an efficient training style that was really a thought out process rather than just going in and just doing a bunch of arbitrary stuff for high volume and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So that was stuff that really resonated with me early, and then I got into powerlifting later. Still feel like the time that I was into powerlifting was kind of and I don't follow powerlifting anymore, so I don't know really the popularity of it. But I do feel like when the years I was involved in powerlifting, it was more popular maybe than it is now. Dane, I don't know if you're still kind of look at that, but I feel like that's the case.
Oh, I mean, look, I think it's I think it depends on whether it's kind of, raw or not, and different countries and things like that. I mean, I think overall it's probably more widely accepted, within kind of the commercial gym chain scene, with, I guess, people, taking the moves and all the training philosophies from powerlifting and integrating it into things.
Yeah.
But I'd say, like, for example, in Australia, it's probably seen a drop off the last 2 or 3 years, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just from a reading the room standpoint, this is how I personally feel
Like, I'd
right
say, I'd
now.
say, just to summarize it, it's more the principles and methodologies that came from powerlifting are more widely used in the industry, but the sport of powerlifting itself seems to have dropped off popularity. So it's done some, like, massive benefit in getting, you know, people in commercial gyms squatting, benching, and deadlifting, for example,
Yeah.
and getting strong, training for strength. Training for strength, 5 years ago was something that, was done in boutique gyms or with, hardcore gyms, so to speak. So I think it's done
Right.
that, but I think you're right. Like, it's from a powerlifting as a sport seems to have, at least here in Australia, dropped off.
Yeah, and I would say that's kind of how I felt about it. I got into powerlifting because I felt like at the time, I did really like, I had just come out of a lot of years of doing dog crap training and a lot of high intensity bodybuilding stuff. And the change did seem nice. And I felt like powerlifting, if I was going to do something competitive involved in any of the like physique athletics or strength athletics stuff, to me at the time, powerlifting seemed like uh, it was more tangible. You had a weight on the bar, you had to hit depth in your squat, you had to pause your bench, you had to lock out your deadlift, all that stuff. And I felt like, okay, so here's tangible concepts that you can sink your teeth into, that it feels less subjective to bodybuilding. That's not really true. The powerlifting's got a lot of room for subjective
Yeah.
judgment. So yeah, so I got into that, and the first few years, I mean, I really enjoyed it. But then, just from an own personal experience and standpoint, and even now when I go and I end up reading like powerlifting conversations, it's there's, and this is just me, and it's just my own observations and being disconnected from that now. It definitely had an effect at the time on my psyche in terms of how I felt about myself, because there were so many people, so much stronger than you, and you get judged and criticized and whatever by if you don't can't. When I say it out loud now, it's the silliest shit I've ever said in my life, right? And I literally have to pull it out of me, like even during this podcast, go like, but that's a moment of being vulnerable, right? That's how I felt, and that's what I struggled with at the time. Was like your self worth ends up being wrapped into how much can you squat or how much can you deadlift or whatever, and it's just some silly ass shit. Because we as human beings should have a more innate ability to connect within ourselves to say my worth is not bound to something as silly as like weight on the
A
bar or a
total.
bank account in my house.
Yeah.
Cars, I don't agree with. I think the kind of car you drive probably says a lot about you as a person. Me and that. But so I went through a lot of years where I did not, you could only be as happy as the PRs that you were hitting in the gym. And I think that there's a lot of people that are in really entangled in some of what I would consider kind of my self-esteem is wrapped up in a certain amount of existential gratitude or gratification that I'm finding, either how my body looks or how much weight I can lift or how many likes I'm getting on this picture or that kind of stuff. I think really getting, when I retired from powerlifting, I think that became, there was a moment of like self-awareness that I had with that, where I was like, I don't, man, I found so much more worth like in the following years, where I really, like, after my divorce happened and I got into self-development and I lost the relationship with my daughters. And you guys are not going to get me to cry on a podcast. Anytime I talk about my girls, I'll start crying. Like they're everything in my world to me. And so I had to spend those years like really getting rid of some of that really those toxic traits and behaviors and stuff that arrive from that feeling of, I need this validation from the outside world to tell me I'm good enough, I'm strong enough, I'm worthy, I'm those kind of things. And then when I went through all those years of that stuff, I was like, man, all I really want to do is wake up every day and know I'm a good man and a good father, and that I have good friendships, and that now it's like waking up every day and putting out good material that can help people,
Yeah.
and my programs that I run that help people be pain free and grow muscle and feel good. But it's not about, hey, I don't have to look a specific way all year. Do I like it when I'm leaner and I feel better? The only reason I like that better is because my clothes just fit better. That's a nice thing. I do think there's something to be said for internally just feeling good in your own skin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't post shirtless selfies anymore. I don't post like this. And when somebody says something about like the former years of my total, I'm like, bro, but I don't care. And it feels so good to be disconnected from that and to truly mean it. They have it come from a place of real authenticity, right? Where I can say, I don't care though,
Yeah.
because like I have a pretty amazing life. I have I wake up every day in this past week. I said, you're not going to get me.
If we do, we do. But
After
to,
after John died, like all three of my girls, they all text me every day and they said, "Dad, what do you need? Like we're here for you. Do you want us to come with you to the funeral?" So
well,
to have
I think
that,
when things like that happen too, it puts life into even more perspective, right? Because we get so caught up. We've all got our routines, how we get out of bed, what we do first thing before we, to start the day, what we do before we go to bed at night, how we approach our days. It's all a set of habits just kind of working together. And then you have something like that out of the ordinary that you just take for granted. A simple phone call to catch up with a friend.
Yeah.
It puts things in perspective. That's for sure. But I think it's from pain comes growth. And
Yeah.
I think even coming back to what you were saying about detaching yourself from kind of that part of the industry where everything is based around self gratification, numbers, whether you've got veins in your abs or not. It's a good place to be in because ultimately, that part of the industry, it's like anything, it has its place,
Yeah.
but it's not really what's going to go out there and help the average Mary or Joe that wants to get healthy and get into shape. And especially in the current climate that we're in. I'm interested actually to find out about like what you're doing these days in terms of your programming, the type of people that you're working with, because you've obviously had a big shift there. Like, tell us about the
yeah.
type of people that you're working with today. How are you delivering that? I know it's online.
Yeah.
Like for anyone that's out there that, for example, might be interested, like what does that involve? What's Paul's approach to training in 2021?
Well, it was the last after, like I said, after I retired from powerlifting, there was a lot of things that changed in terms of, like I wanted to grow my knowledge in the areas of like biomechanics and functional anatomy and that kind of stuff, and I ended up making connections with Ben Pekulski at the time, like out in Tampa. He was out in Tampa at the time, because Charles and Ben were close,
Mm-hmm.
and then so that I ended up meeting people like Cassim through there,
Yep.
and then spending tons of time working on my own. Like not that I'm self-taught and everything. I have a ninth grade education. A lot of people don't know that. So I left
Yep.
school after ninth grade, and so I just spent the last few years, and that's been such. It was like a rebirth, right? It's like anytime you find something like that reignites your passion, and you're like, I want to grow every part of my knowledge in this area. That's such a
Because
fun
Sam
thing.
actually reminded me, like him and I. It's funny, like him and I did all of our stuff with Charles back in the day. I remember him and I going to
Yeah, yeah,
different.
that's how. Yeah, like I said, that was the. It all comes back to Poliquin, right? Like he just connected everybody.
What would you guys say impacted or shaped both of your philosophies? And given that you both like following and have followed Charles Poliquin throughout your own journeys, what would you say is one of the most impacted philosophy that you still use to this day for your own?
Charles, the thing that Charles told me, we had, though, here's the funny thing about Charles. I have so many funny Charles stories too. So keep me on point here with that, Maria,
Gotcha.
about your question there, and I'll tell you.
Yes.
But Charles he used to text me. He'd be like, he would just text me, get on Skype. And I would go, okay. Like he was very demanding, but I loved him, right? He would like, get on Skype. And then so I get on Skype and he'd pop up and he'd be sitting there and shirtless like at his desk. And I'm like, dude, what? I feel like I'm getting on gay porn right now. Like, what are you doing? And then he would just like start laughing. But he would always give me all these Skypes, and we would same thing. We would talk for hours. I had that with the guys that ended up being my closest friend. We always had that connection where we could just sit and talk and connect about stuff. And Charles told me, he said, if you want to grow a really good business and a big business and make money and that kind of stuff, he said, don't worry about that. Worry about expanding your knowledge to the infinite degrees that you can, and the rest will always end up taking care of itself. So you don't have to be the best person at like delivering an online like presence, or you don't have to have the best body or whatever. But if you are in possession of a lot of knowledge, at some point that will be discovered, and people are going to go, I want to know what you know. I want what you have.
Yeah.
And so that really stuck with me. And I think the thing that's really impactful about all those close relationships that I've had over the years is that all of those guys that I consider like either close brothers or like they had a mentorship kind of thing, like they gave me something back that has really stuck with me. And that was the thing from Charles, is they just never stop trying to learn and get better, because there's, no matter how much stuff you think you know, the more that you end up learning, the more you realize, I don't know shit.
Yes.
I learned that as a computer engineer. I was a computer engineer for 15 years. And the longer I did it, the more I realized I don't know anything. But during the times that you think you really got it nailed down, that's when you don't know shit. So during those years, like the first probably 5 years I was a computer engineer, I remember having times like, man, I know a lot about this stuff. I'm Brady. I got it going on up here. And then the longer I go on, I was like, there's so much to know. I can't know everything.
That's what I thought about myself as a trainer back in 2008, and then I attended a workshop with Charles, and by lunch I realized I was an idiot. It was so it's I can attest to that. I mean, I think
you don't know that there's a next level until you see that next level. Then you're like, oh, I ain't shit.
Yeah,
I think that's the most exciting thing, and regardless what industry you're in, personally with myself too, it excites me that there's so much that I don't know, and like I've since the very beginning, I've taught myself to never think that I know everything, because like you said, I meet someone else that has some other source of knowledge that I probably was never introduced to, especially now, with the presence of social media and being introduced to other leaders and their philosophies and their knowledge, buying their textbooks, and all of that seems so exciting to me, because everyone has such different opinions and points of views and studies and things like that to offer, that it's like I'm like a sponge. I'm like, oh, you want to say this? Let me read up on why. Or you want to teach people this? I don't understand why.
Were you in my I made a really I feel like I'm a pretty funny person, especially when I have time to type out my thoughts. Well, were you in my Q&A last week?
I was briefly. I had to leave, but I was at the Q&A for that.
Okay, so somebody had asked me a question, and do you remember my metaphor about fishing? And
yeah, repeat that for our listeners.
It was something to the effect of, I said something about when my followers ask me a question, and I'm like, and I tell them to Google it, and they call me an asshole for telling them to Google it, but they don't get I'm actually trying to help them, because somebody asked me how I knew all the stuff that I know, and I'm like, or how I do research, and I'm like, I just Google stuff. And then when my followers ask me, what does this mean or whatever, I'm like, Google it. And they're like, you're an asshole. And I'm like, so basically what I summarized that to was like, it's like a starving guy, and he asks a guy to feed him, and he's like, let me show you how to fish so you can eat again tomorrow. And the guy tells him he's an asshole. I was like, that's my followers. Yeah. And I'm like, that's what I end up dealing with out of my followers a lot of times, because people these days, and this is a real thing, I feel like this is my perception, this is a real thing, that they are very entitled, and they feel like if they ask you a question that it's just you're a civil servant to them, and that you must just be at their beck and call and answer their questions. And I'll be like, you should just Google that. And then they're like, you're an asshole. I'm like, okay, but here's my thing about why I tell people to Google that, is because go on a self-discovery process to educate yourself about some of these things. And then the next thing you know, you're like, I know 10 things that I didn't know before. Yeah. And that's how you grow your knowledge.
And that's the thing. Like, I remember when, back when I was training, people, like, I remember attending a few of Charles's courses, like 13, 14, 15 years ago, whatever it was. And he'd talk about a supplement, right? and he'd talk about one of his different supplements, and he'd obviously skim over it to a certain extent in the workshop. And so I remember I would take those supplements, I would look at the 5, 6 ingredients in it, and then I would go and research each one of those ingredients. I would go to PubMed, I would look at the studies, and I'd create a dossier of each nutrient and the research behind it so that I could better understand it. Now, I wasn't.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I don't know why you why educate yourself like that, man.
And when and that's, I think you're right. Like, today's fitness industry, it's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because there is actually access to a lot of information out there if you're willing to make the effort to go after it. Far more than in the early 2000s when you literally had, T Nation and a few other resources online that you could go to for information.
Let's back it up further than that. Before the internet, I had a subscription to every muscle building magazine there was on the planet, and then I couldn't wait for them to come in each month. Yeah. Look, man, people that are like younger than us, they don't know the struggle. No. Like they don't struggle. I don't know. How old are you, Maria?
I'm 22. I did, granted, at the beginning of my education life, I still opened textbooks and I had to go to libraries. It wasn't as easy just Googling things because it wasn't as easy. So I can relate a little bit to
Maria, but I've said this before, you're an anomaly. Like, Maria's been doing clean health courses since she was a teenager. She's been powerlifting since she was 16. Like, you're a rarity.
But here's the thing. Like, I literally, coming up through my teenage years, I had a subscription to Flex, Muscle Fitness, Muscular Development, Muscle Mag 2000. I had a subscription, all of them. That was what I just wanted. And then they would come in each month. I would just devour them front to back. And then when I would go to bookstores, I would buy all the books that I could buy on anything and read all those. And I mean, literally, I would stay up, and I remember, people don't remember this, but ESPN used to do, I don't remember what it was called, but it wouldn't come on all the time, but it was basically like a bodybuilding show that would come on, and I would end up recording it with a VCR. They don't know, I have always done that kind of stuff, right? That I've been like this forever. And then that's why people ask me, they're like, where did you get all this knowledge? I'm like, that's 30 years that I spent in books, in videos, and go traveling and going to workshops and seminars and stuff and spending time educating yourself. But what I was saying is when people ask me now, it's so crazy how what I feel like is intellectual laziness. You can have a video with a caption and how to do something, and people will still have 1,000 dumbass questions. And I say that, people are like, oh, you're so mean. I'm like, no, I'm not. Because I literally, as a teenager, could open up a magazine and look at a couple of pictures and go to the gym and do that.
Yeah.
And you got a video and a caption and still pictures and slides and this and that and diagrams, and you still got questions. You just still have to go into the gym and do stuff.
And you need to feel it. You need to feel it in your body. You want to learn a movement or how to train, go to the program.
Yeah, And saying, going into the gym and training, I think this is a good leeway to the next question about, given the COVID pandemic, a lot of people are forced to train at home, and people who are used to training at the gym, or whether they're just starting to train and have, home as their only place to do so, what would you say would be your tips, in preserving and building muscle from home, given that maybe not everyone has access to a stacked home gym or heavy weights at all?
Well, the first thing is this: maintaining muscle is really not that difficult. It doesn't take a lot to maintain what you have, and I think people get bent up on do I have a bunch of heavyweights or whatever. The first thing you have to understand is that if you're training in a specific proximity to muscular failure, you are just accumulating enough mechanical tension to cause the catalyst for growth. You can do that across pretty much any rep range. So if you're doing a set of 30 and you're basically close to failure, or you accumulating fatigue so that you get to failure, then you're going to have reps that create mechanical tension. And mechanical tension is the main driver for muscle growth. A lot of people, they'll say wrongly that it is volume. Volume is not the driver for muscle growth. It's mechanical tension. Without mechanical tension, without tension on the muscle fibers, there's no reason for them to grow. So when people are at home, if you have weights, you can do body weight stuff that you can maintain all the muscle that you built in the gym as long as you're training with a high degree of effort.
Yeah.
And there's a multitude of ways that you can go about stuff like that. So one of the things about definitely training at home, most of the body weight exercises, if you don't have some well developed glutes, then pretty much all of the body weight exercises at home, like lunges and split squats and uh, um, body weight squats, and pretty much everything you can end up doing that's going to challenge you with body weight is going to build your glutes. So if anything, for people at home, if you got a flat ass, you should be able to come out of the quarantine with a big booty.
I
I
like,
guess that should be the litmus test, right? For
yeah.
who is really getting after it during lockdowns, who's got the most badonkadonk
Before
Yes.
and
coming
after.
out of lockdown.
Yeah.
Right.
I like that. And I think it's important to realize that, you can still take the basic fundamentals that you are using in the gym at home. It just takes a little bit more effort. And I think it also, that mental effort of getting up in the comfort of your home to train, I think that's like the one thing that kind of is harder to click for some people. I know that I was in the midst of prep when the first lockdown hit, and I panicked until I was like, you know what, Facebook Market, I bought a dumbbell, one set of dumbbells, a barbell, and 45 plates, and I was like, this is all I have, coach. This is all I'm using. And I was able to successfully maintain, if not grow, a few inches in the glutes and legs. And man, oh man, were those split squats, lunges, Bulgarian split squats, the death of me. But I definitely think when there's a will, there's a way. You just got to put in the effort when it comes to home training, for real.
What's funny is when I retired from powerlifting, I had like no glute development, and now I'm kind of like known like a lot of my followers for like my glute development. And like people ask me about that all the time, but 2 years, I just did lunges twice a week. I did lunges and I do leg curls for my hamstrings. But I didn't want to squat because I'd spent the last 10 years squatting for powerlifting. The last thing I wanted to do was put a barbell back, and I don't squat anymore at all. And my glutes are like huge. And all I did for 2 years was just thousands and thousands and thousands of lunges. And that pretty much, if you have a pancake ass, then I promise you, if you spend a couple of years lunging
Yes.
till like you die, your glutes are going to grow. As long as you're lunging correctly, there are some mechanics
Yes,
involved with
yes, yes,
lunging.
yes.
To either bias the glutes or quads, and I actually teach that in my groups. You'd asked earlier about groups, so a lot of this stuff is like the stuff I
Okay.
teach in my groups is like. So if you have a lunge, if people will say like, well, this doesn't work in a lunge or that doesn't work in a lunge, and I'm like, well, let me see your mechanics, and then I see their mechanics. I'm like, this is why
Yeah.
either that is happening or like, so that's a lot of the stuff that we go over. One of the things that drawing that
Yeah.
discussion back around what you're asking, Dane, is that because of really good mechanics, what you come to understand is all the movements that you do, if they're done properly, are corrective exercises. So that's something I try to really talk about a lot, was that you don't need, if you're having to do like rehab or whatever, stuff like that, then something's probably wrong in all the mechanics that you're using. And a lot of people end up in pain or have pain or injury because they don't have good mechanics and they're consistently passing on that high degree of tension onto the passive or connective tissues. And then once you actually start learning how the body is supposed to move and what the mechanics are supposed to look like to load the tissue that actually moves the joints, then what happens is you're not loading that passive or connective tissue anymore, and you're actually asking the tissue, the active tissue, the functional tissue that moves the joint. Once you say that's what my body is going to use to move this joint,
Yeah.
then what happens is you grow muscle and you're pain free. And that's the thing I wake up to pretty much every day in all my groups of people. Like, I have never felt this pain free. I've got people that have been training for 10, 15, 20 years that are like, I gained 7 pounds of new muscle this past year and got leaner. I've got people that put up DEXA scans and all sorts of stuff. But the main thing they all talk about consistently is like, my body's never felt this good. That is like an awesome thing to give back. And touching back around something we were hitting on earlier about life is that when we were talking about getting into those really dysfunctional, toxic places of needing that consistent feedback of self-worth from the world, one of the things Tony Robbins consistently says that hit me during the times that I was detaching from that belief of I needed this existential validation was that giving is living.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you really learn what it means to give back to
Yeah.
people, what it means to give back to the world, you feel so fulfilled every day in your life.
There's
You
purpose
still
behind
feel
your
so fulfilled.
passion. Yeah.
Absolutely. And without like this deep sense of meaning to wake up to every day, that's when life starts to feel empty. Like, but what is my this deep sense of meaning and purpose that I get up and have each day in my life? And that was the part in connecting those two things was that one of the things that I wake up and I get so much fulfillment from and enjoyment in my life is creating those programs and helping people with their mechanics and watching them talk about how I cannot believe how pain free I am and I'm making gains for the first time in 5 years and I feel great about my body, but I feel great about lifting and I have enthusiasm again. And I'm like, every day long, it's just like this. My heart's full, right? And then I have all my stuff with my girls, and so it's just the thing about it's a really weird, it's counterintuitive because the more that you try to take in this life and the more that you think I need to get, the emptier you end up feeling. And then when you actually reach a place, when you have that paradigm shift that happens where you're like, man, when I give back and I do, and I like, it's just, I get everything at that point.
And you find life and all the stuff that you were chasing free flows back to you with much more ease. As well.
100%, like everything. All of a sudden, it's like what Charles said earlier. If you'll stop, don't chase the money and don't chase like the fame, don't chase that stuff. Grow your intellect and grow your knowledge base because then when you do that, all that stuff starts showing up for you, and you're like, it's like, hey, what I wanna have what you have, and then you just continue giving back all of that stuff, and your life just continues to multiply. But it's the opposite because selfish people are often selfish because they feel so empty inside and they feel like they can't get enough. So when you feel like that, the last thing that you feel like doing is giving because you're like, I already feel empty and I already don't feel like I can get enough. So let me just take.
Yeah.
But it's the opposite. Once you start giving and showing up for people, and once you start saying, hey, what can I do for you? And how can I show up for you in your life? To love you better, to make you feel more heard, to make you feel more understood. How can I give to you and makes your life better? And all of a sudden you're like, wow, this feels really good. This is a good place to be in. And so that's the kind of the way that everything in my life has changed and shaped. Because I don't think I was in a really good place in my life. I had a lot of things going on when I was out there with you in Australia, Dane. Like I had,
but you and me both. Like you and me both. It was.
Yeah, man, and that's the weird thing. It's like I'm not even that person anymore, right? Like I'm just
No,
not
I can
even
see.
remote.
I can see, and
Yeah,
I think
and so
it makes a difference. Like but I think as well, not going through those periods in your life. If you don't go through them, you don't know what good looks like.
yeah, and you don't. The one thing even like getting at that time, that was definitely during a time where I could not wake up. And I didn't want to even look at myself in the mirror every day I had so much going on in my life and so many decisions I made. And I haven't felt like that. I remember a buddy of mine asked me at the time, this podcast ended up being a deep philosophical type of conversation. I had a buddy ask me that was going through the doldrums and some really deep valleys in his life at that time too. And he's like, do you ever think you're just going to wake up one day and just feel happy again? Man, that was a hard look at Maria. She's like, wow, that's really. We were both going through some really dark waters at that time in our life. And I remember I was literally in a parking lot at the time when he and I was having that conversation. And I was in a bad place in my life. And I remember he told me that. Man, I just sat there and cried because when you're in those really deep valleys like that, you don't feel like you will ever get to the precipice of where life could feel better again, where you like, can I wake up happy? Ever just have a day where I wake up happy again? I don't have any days now where I don't wake up happy again. Where I don't like, and I think about John passing this week, and I'm like, wake up every day. And even before that happened, I wake up every day, and I'm like, I'm so thankful for the life I get every day. I feel so incredibly blessed.
I think it's important, to be grateful even for the simplest things. Like I kind of pinch myself, in a similar type of fashion, like every day, for even the smallest things that I'm grateful for. The blades of grass that I get to sit on outside in my backyard, whilst the rest of my state is in lockdown right now.
I think one of the biggest game changers, even for myself, was taking a moment in the morning when, it's that hard moment coming out of bed when you are feeling that deep and dark and have those thoughts. Because, I've been there and I've been there recently, and it's not fun and it feels very lonely. And I think one of the things that really, really, really helps me in those moments is waking up and being like, thank God I'm awake. Thank God I'm able to stand up right now, and counting those like moments of gratitude for those little things where on the day to day we're kind of just like, oh, house, car, this, and we don't even think about it because we're in such a deep routine and we're so used to it. But in moments when, something like the pandemic and, people that we love and care about passing, those are moments where we're like, whoa, wait a second. My life itself is something I should be very grateful for. And it kind of helps you pull out of those holes, and just practicing gratitude. As bad as the day can go, at least you're having that day, right? At least you're living through that day and experiencing it. So, and I like hearing, people like you guys and just males in general talking about these things, because, women are usually labeled as being able to talk about these things really easily and still struggling to do so. But with men especially, it's that wall where you don't talk about those things and you have to put on that face to like hide everything. I think myself, including, and the listeners included, like, I'm happy to hear that men are talking about this and are open about this and are vulnerable to talk about this, because we're not alone and you guys are not alone. And, everyone experiences this once in their life. Especially, I feel like now with the pandemic, I feel like it's a recipe for people to feel this way a lot. But knowing that, we're not alone through all of this is really important.
I think Dane hit on something I wanted to touch on earlier too, and I can even look at him now and tell like he's even in a better place. Same thing is like that we were both not happy men and happy people back around the time that we were doing that. But you said something earlier that I really want to touch on. I think it was very poignant, and that is this: all of the trials, and anybody ends up listening to this that is in a dark place in their life, that is going through a deep valley and is struggling or suffering, and we all go through that. Here is what I really want to impress upon people: when you go through those and you're like, why is this happening to me, whatever, I 100% now completely understand, for example, what James and Paul wrote about in Corinthians and what wrote about in Acts, and that is that persevering, it gives us completeness. And I think about what I went through. There was the 3-year span where my oldest daughter didn't talk to me. There was an 8-month span where my middle daughter didn't talk to me. And my youngest, I could tell she didn't like to stay with me. Like she didn't, when I was going through all that, I had to work so hard for so long to earn back their love and trust. And I have everything with them now. I talk about that openly for this reason. I've had so many men that have DM'd me or inboxed me over the years since I've talked about that, and said, I'm going through similar things with my son or with my daughter, whatever. What did you feel like that you had to do in order to regain and rebuild those relationships? And I've helped so many other men with stuff that I had to do, that they were able to come back to me later and said, things are so much better. I'm really gaining traction. My daughter's talking to me again. My son's talking to me again. It's been hard, but I just stuck to it, like you said, and so forth and so on. And the things that I had to learn, that I went through, and I did my own therapy, I did relationship courses, everything that I did and I invested in has now, I've given that back to lots of other men that were in bad places with their kids. And I thought of so many times when I was going through that, because when I hit the lowest point, I literally, and it's the only time in my life I've ever sat there, but I loaded up my 40 caliber handgun, and I was just going to end it all. I wrote my suicide note and everything. Yeah. Here's a true story. That came at a time where like my kids didn't want anything to do with me, and like I felt so alone in this world. And I loaded up my 40 caliber and I put one round in the chamber. I wrote my suicide note, and I was sitting there, and I was about to go ahead, and my phone rang, and it was like midnight. It was after midnight, and it was my best friend. His name's Sweet. It was my best friend, and I just sat there and looked at the phone, like wondering why he never called me. We always talked through either text or Facebook inbox. He never called, and I answered the phone, and I just didn't say anything. He goes, "Hey." He goes, "Are you okay? I got this weird feeling." That the 100% really happened. And I just started crying. He stayed up with me till 5 o'clock in the morning. And thank God, like in those moments.
It's those, when things like that happen, it's, not to get too woosah, but it definitely, there's a reason why that happened.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just, for a friend of yours to never call you, to randomly just call you at midnight
He can still talk about that
based
to
off
this
a
day.
feeling. Like
Yeah.
that's just incredible. You know.
Yeah, it was very weird. And like what's funny was we had this really amazing, funny, unique friendship in that we used to make jokes about each other's hard times. So like he would ask me like how are you doing? And I'm like, dude, it's been the worst day ever. Like I can't stop crying, this and that. He's like, dude, that's awesome. That makes my whole day. And like that was like a joke between us because that would make me laugh and then I would feel better.
Yeah.
So whenever I told him, he's like, I picked up the phone. I didn't say anything. He's like, hey, he's like, are you okay? I just got this really weird feeling. And I remember I started crying. I told him, like, I read my note, like, I told him everything that was going on. And he goes, what about me, motherfucker? And like, that made me laugh, right? He goes, would you leave me like this? And so he stayed up talking with me all night, and that got me through. And that was like kind of the little climb that
Mm,
started, and that was the little climb, like right back out. The catalyst of like just ascending back out was
mm,
just getting through that dark moment, and you just never know. Sometimes when you just need like that's what we talking about as men, just
mm.
connecting and being be vulnerable. But I felt incredibly alone in that moment, and I thank God to this day that something in him like gave him that intuition to just pick up the phone and call me, or otherwise I wouldn't be here. So, and that's the only time that's ever happened to me in my life. That was as bad as it ever got. And then I've realized, and I've had that conversation so many times that all of these trials and deep valleys we go through. That's why I say anybody ever hears this, understand that plenty of us have gotten there where it's dark
Mm.
and you can't see a way out. But there, if you will just hang in there and understand that all of these things that you go through give you opportunities to grow into this much stronger, more resilient,
Yeah.
well-rounded, complete person. That you can talk to somebody else that's down the line, right? That's
Mm,
there in a place like that. And you're like, brother, I know where you're at. I
mm.
know 100%. I can feel what you're going through, and I've
You
been
can
there
have you know,
before.
and you're able to come from a place of true empathy and compassion because
Yeah.
you've sat in that seat.
You've been in those shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, hit me with like a training or two
No,
Yes.
questions.
well, no. There's one key thing. I think
Yes.
two more questions, but
Yes.
Okay.
one question I want to loop back on is with your online coaching and the training stuff that you're doing now. Like, for those trainers out there that are listening in our audience, and there's a lot of them, like, what is your advice on how you've been obviously able to navigate and pivot, in particular over the last 5 years? Because from what I gather, all of your stuff is online. You're able to obviously work from the comfort of your own home. I think
Yeah.
especially driving your fancy cars,
No,
especially.
you can't say anything about driving fancy cars. You're the last person that can say anything about this.
I know, but especially in today's climate where gyms are shut down, and like from a global perspective, I mean, sure, North America's quite open, but there's lots of parts of the world that aren't. And then actually, even within North America, there's different states depending on where you live. You're going to have different restrictions.
Right.
In many respects, you're living the dream, right? For a lot of young up and coming trainers, like what would be some of your kind of bits of advice, but then also some of the stuff that you've done to be able to build a successful online coaching business?
Yeah. So here's my thing. If you want to build an online business, like a business,
Yeah.
like I would be able to speak overly plain here, especially if you're a guy. I can speak for males and females in this particular regard. Do you want to have followers or do you want to have consumers?
Yeah.
Mm,
Because if you want to have consumers, then you need to have something that they want that can help improve them as a trainer or an educator or whatever. And posting like tons of ass pics is not going to get that done.
Yeah.
well,
So
just on that point, I think difference between followers and consumers spot on, because I know lots of people with big profiles, a million followers, but they don't have a business from it.
Yeah.
Whereas
yeah,
you might
like
have someone with 50,000 followers that has a business from it, because those
Yeah.
50,000 followers.
I'm friends with some people who have 500,000 to 1 million followers that I make literally 10 times more a month
Yeah,
than they do
Yeah.
yeah.
because they're not educators. So do
Yeah.
you want a big following or do you want a lot of consumers? Because if you have, and when I was like me and Sarah used to talk back in the day, I used to tell her, I was like, I had 1 million followers, I would have multiple yachts. And so I'm still headed that way. Like they talk about having fancy cars. One day I'll have fancy yachts. But anyway, so if you want to actually like grow and you want to have a successful online business, then you have to decide how you're going to show up each day
Yeah.
on social media if you're going to grow your social media and want to grow business. So one of the things, like you brought her up earlier, is Lauren Simpson. She's a great educator, right? She is, when you go to her social media content, she's a beautiful girl. But she also has what I consider like a classy social media and constantly presents educational content.
Yep.
So the reason why, her and, Mark crush it is because they're educators. So do you want to grow a social media that is unique? Then you need to educate yourself and be able to give back to people in a way that they're like, wow, this is interesting. This is helpful. I learned something from this. But not only that, it helped improve me as a trainer. It'll improve my own training or whatever, so forth and so on. And I also think that from that perspective too, there's lots of people that can give that, but they're so damn boring and dull that you're like, you go to there and you're like, oh, this is interesting, but like there's one guy, I don't remember what his name is, I see him once in a while, but his stuff comes up and he tries to get so in depth on the scientific stuff, it's just boring. Like my favorite researcher is Chris Beardsley. He's the freaking man. So Chris talks at a level most people can't follow. But if you're like me and you're into that, like if you're like really nerdtastic like I am, like his kind of stuff is really appealing to me. But at the same time, it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody. It's going to be for hardcore, like
Science
nerdy,
nerd.
educated people. But if you can take that stuff and you can deliver it in a way that the average layman can kind of understand and get something out of, that is where your money lives. And Charles used to tell me the same thing because the one thing I was really good at was overhead pressing. I had an almost near 400-pound, 405 strict overhead press.
Okay.
So I was like world-class level. I did 385 press behind the neck. Charles thought that was like the shit. But he's like, yeah, that's great. I had a 500-pound incline, or near 500. It was 475. So I had some pretty strong lift, but Charles would do this. He'd be like, yeah, that's great, Paul. Charles was loaded. So he's like, yeah, that's great, Paul. But the average guy, he doesn't know any. He doesn't know like that pressing 400 pounds. That's any different than 300 pounds overhead. They just know that's whatever. He goes, if you actually want to grow a business, what the person you need to appeal to is the guy that wants to bench press 3 plates and have abs for the beach. That is the guy that's the most commonly out there. So when you look at stuff, you really look at, you have to detach yourself kind of from the bodybuilding world and get back in touch with the dude who wants to
you've really pivoted more towards general population, haven't you?
I would say,
like compared to 5 years ago.
Yeah, I would say that my spectrum now is kind of in a weird way, kind of my own, because really hardcore bodybuilders like Brandon Curry is my friend, and I talked to Brandon, and I've trained lots of guys that have been on the Olympia stage. But then I also have a way to connect with the average guy who doesn't really know about that, but definitely knows he wants to get jacked or he wants to stop doing barbell lifts or he wants to do that kind of stuff. So if you could say that I've had a 180 pivot, then it was more along the lines I went back to my roots in that pivot. So it was more along the lines I went back to when I was growing up when I was a kid. I would just want to be really jacked, and I wanted to, I'd be bricked up and feel like a stud. So that was pretty much that was my pivot back to kind of to that range. But that's what I feel like I can give to the people who come into my programs is that I can get them usually, for the most part, in the best shape of their life, pain free. And I feel like in that regard, I kind of deliver that in a way that's a little bit unique to everybody else in the industry.
Yeah, and talking on social media about social media and your presence on social media, you're honestly not that afraid to debunk or share your personal views on a lot of things when it comes to training. But like, how do you deal with a lot of like the people
COVID.
Or COVID. But how do you deal with all the people who criticize you or want to challenge your theories in a positive or negative way? How do you deal with all of that criticism?
I get a lot of that, and I really don't give a shit. So so John Meadows, going back to John used to send me articles all the time. He's like, you know what I love about you, Paul? He used to tell me this. He's like, you don't care what anybody else's opinion of you is. You're like, man, but I don't give a fuck. And he's like, you would just always say that. And that's just generally how I feel. I don't feel deterred by people talking shit to me. Here's why. Here's the truth. It comes back to what we said earlier. Generally, when people bring some dysfunctional BS to you, it's their own stuff in here. It's not. It's really not about you. So when somebody comes at you, and I have to remind myself of that. When somebody comes at you like that in a really nasty, gross, dysfunctional way, it's stuff they have in here, right? You can't ever. I've heard this before. Like Paul's like an a-hole or whatever. You can't go to any social media anywhere, and find me talking trash on people or saying snarky stuff on their stuff because I don't do it because I don't care.
Yeah.
I post my stuff and then they'll bring that garbage to me and I'm like, bro, if you're going to show up on my doorstep with some dirty feet and bring some disrespect into my house, you're just going to get it back.
Yeah.
So, but if you come to me like me and Jeff Nippert, who's got like a huge following, Jeff came and he didn't agree with some stuff we had. So we debated it right there. But he was always respectful. He always asked either like intelligent questions. But like now we're buddies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, everybody can have that with me if you just show us some respect. But if you show up and decide, no, I'm just going to wade all this shit into your house, I'm like, bro, I'm about to punch you in the face. So that's just kind of how I work. And I feel like I'm the most loving person that I know. But don't show up and be like, here's the attitude I'm bringing to this party. And be like, well, okay, man, let's go then. And then they're like, wow, you're really mean. I'm like, no, dude, you brought that here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like
And then
there's always going to be those people who have to speak ill, and it does come from a place of their own. I've experienced it even from the very beginning when I started my Instagram, just posting just because I was like,
oh, come on, Reed. Don't tell me that you don't get like some shade thrown at you on like on comments.
fake pages all the time. And at the end of the day,
They never have a profile picture.
No.
They never have a
And
profile
I think
picture.
at the beginning, it really affected me because I was so new to it. And I was like, I really want people just to like, I'm not doing anything bad. I'm just trying to inspire people. And I have people throwing shade at me and insulting me. And it got to the point where I was like, literally all I have to do is block you. You don't have to follow me. It's detaching from that. Like, I don't need.
I ask people that.
Yeah.
I ask people, I'm like, then why are you following me, bro?
Yeah, and I think we touch back to that one other point you made about like detaching from, I don't need you to like me. I don't need you to follow me. I don't need you to tell me that I'm great because I'm great. You know, you got to tell yourself that sometimes. Obviously room for improvement always, but I don't need you to tell me that. And I think that that's a good point for anybody in the industry. You're going to have people that come and try to dim your light. You just got to keep on pushing through and just stay.
The one they would try to hit me with, and this is definitely another good life lesson for people in general, is they would hit me with, I lost so much respect for you. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm supposed to be devastated now? I don't know how to recover from that. A dude I don't know that I've never set foot in my life that'll never pay any of my bills or help me raise my kids or be there for me when I'm in the hospital lost respect for me. Wow, how do I recover from this life-altering, earth-shattering event? Like, how do I recover from this? So I really do try to lead with love and respect. I will lead with that, but if you bring like that to my doorstep, I'm not about it. And like, that's just, and what I try to do in those moments is that make people have some self-reflection about their own energy that they're bringing to the table. Now there are times when I'm just like nice and I can tell that person's just not there. And I'm like, bro, what's the problem today?
Yeah.
But I really never, ever take any of that stuff personally.
Yeah.
I never
take
can't. I think, especially with social, if you took the wisdom from people, every other minute, you'd be wasting all your time and throwing your energy where it doesn't need to go.
Yeah.
I just delete and block. John said the same thing. He goes, what I like to do, he goes, when somebody gets mad and types out this big word salad and that has something to say, he goes, I just go and I just delete that comment and say nothing because they typed that out for no reason.
Yeah.
John had he was like the master of dealing with trolls because people would write really nasty stuff to John Meadows, who was like the Mr. Rogers, right? Like of the fitness world. Yeah. Somebody would write something nasty to him and he would put a smiley face on it as a response. And that's like the ultimate troll back to the person is to throw a smiley face. Because when you feed that troll, you're just giving them what they want. But then sometimes I don't care. Because I'm kind of a master. I've had
We're
like
all
a couple
human,
of
mate,
decades.
at the end, eh?
Yeah, I've had a couple of decades of refining that craft. Marie, if you've been following me long enough, you see me burn people down like at the stake. And other people's like, I don't know why you guys would ever engage with him because he's like got like a PhD in like trash talking. Yeah. I remember when this was a funny one. I remember when I stood up for my family, like Alan Aragon, when all this stuff happened with Alan. And people came at me and he's like, bro, it was like a massacre. People were saying stuff to you. And he's like, I have never seen anybody with that kind of wizardry with like burning people at the stake. Like he's like, it was amazing to watch. And I'm like, dude, I got like 20 years of talking trash online. I know how to handle my business over here.
Exactly. Well, I mean, look, to kind of wrap things up, where to for you this year? Like, so, what are you focusing on? What projects? Like, what are the kind of, goals and mission for you coming into the back end of 2021?
I right now 100% like my focus from like my business standpoint is to continue to grow my programs. I really want to take the dive because I keep getting hounded about this to open a beginner program and create a pipeline
Okay.
into my more high level intermediate to advanced type programs. And I think that's a good thing because I have a lot of people that are new and on their fitness journey. And I'm not saying it because I just think that's really funny. Everybody uses that phrase. Like, I'm on my fitness journey. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, so like somebody who's on their initial stages of their fitness journey, it's like they could come into like a new program and I would have some of the things like more of like videos where we're talking about like the one video I put up the other day with like, hey, it's something as simple as in order to create neutral spine, take your shirt, bite it,
Yeah.
and then like use the Dow thing. And some people are like, holy crap, that's genius. I'm like, but I have all tons of these. So little simple things like that to give beginners and novices that don't understand some of these concepts and just take them through some basic stuff. And I'm thinking something like a first year where if you go through the beginner program for the first year, then you can graduate into the other groups like the Yoke Squad or the Valkyrie or Garage Gangsters or stuff like that and then grow that out. But I don't know that I want to do it. Yeah, I want to do it, but like I have to get up the courage to do it because of the amount of questions I know I'm going to get out of the noobs. And the noob questions really drive me insane because I have to remind myself, be like if I went out to like a Formula One racetrack and I was like, they were talking like Formula One race car driver stuff. And I'm like, what does that mean, bro? And they would be like, what? Dude, you are such a
How do you
noob.
not
Like you
know?
don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? How do you not know what that means? Like some type of physics velocity, like on the track of a tire, like in the camber of the rear right wheel and during the turn or whatever. And I'm like, bro, what does that even mean? And they're like, how can you not know what that means? Like that's like day one stuff. And I have to remind myself of that too, right? Because I end up like I'm consistently studying at like, okay, so it's like uh, the iliac fibers of the glute max is going to
But I
make sure
think
it's going to
that's
have
also
this.
part of right, like niching as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, do you keep just reinforcing and strengthening your niche, or do you open it up? But I think it all comes down to demand. I mean, if you got the demand
Yeah.
and you got the patience,
Yeah, that's I will probably be bringing on a coach. I think I actually because my groups have expanded so much, I can't keep up with all the questions. So I'll probably be bringing on a coach within this next year. I don't know how well you do with beginner questions, Maria, but
I
I mean that
think
could be
I
fun.
think for me, especially because I train in person and online, I try to remind myself that I was
Marie is
also a
still in
big
the trenches in the
yeah,
real world training.
yeah. And
Yeah.
one day I'll be living the Lux life like
But
you guys.
by the
I'm not
way,
giving up.
I say it like this. I love it. Like
Yeah,
I think for someone from and I've said this to you, Maria, before, like from your generation, so many in the under 25 demographic of the fitness industry, they literally just want to go online and do online programs.
yeah,
They want to get their cert. They don't want to go work in a gym. Actually, know what it's like to coach and cue
yeah.
and feel and mentor someone hands on. They just want to get their cert, go online.
That's okay. You don't have to listen to that, Maria. I never did that stuff either.
Yeah, and but to answer
But
your
you're but you're
question,
di- but you're different. Like
yeah,
you did it on yourself for
yeah,
decades. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
there's a
And
difference. There's a difference
And
there.
to answer your question, I think one thing I think most trainers will benefit from this, and mentioning what you were talking about too, about taking yourself away and being like, what would it be like if I didn't know anything at all? Kind of like, I don't like this term, but like dumbing it down in the sense of like, I was a beginner and I didn't understand anything from the magazines that I was reading, the textbooks I was reading. I was like, okay, until you start to actually get into the nitty gritty and, as a trainer, working with the client in person and understanding that, hey, maybe this cue or this information doesn't work for this person because they have no idea what I'm talking about, that in a way to say it so that they are able to understand it, it took some time, but I think being able to do that allows me to reach more people and being able to communicate it to people in the industry that, like yourself, who is super educated. When you're talking about, your techniques and your teachings, I can understand it. But if I was to have, one of my clients come and read your, your readings, be like, what does this even mean? Right? Like I've had that.
I get those DMs. I get DMs like when people noobs will come through my Q&A and they'll put crying faces in the DM. They'll be like, I don't know what's going on in these comments.
Yeah, and that's where it comes for, like, the images and like your interpretations, those videos, and that's a plus of social media, because you could put all of that in one, so you have levels to your information. You could have one picture for the news, one picture for the advanced, this, and really reach everyone. But it's really important to pull away and kind of allow yourself to share that education in many levels if that's your goal. Like if your goal is to have a niche that's greater than just educators, right, who know and understand your language, being able to reach those people as well, you'll have a higher reach in like the general population and all of that stuff, who may not necessarily learn it, and how you were saying, like, have a step, right? Start with the beginner's guide and kind of ease their way up to the more advanced levels of information that you're providing.
Yeah, that's funny, because me and Cassim, actually, we've had that conversation before, and he and I talk a lot, and we have lots of in-depth talks about biomechanics, but his crowd is literally the personal trainers who want to teach at a more really nuanced level. And I'm like, I literally just want to make tens of millions of dollars and like make the average Joe better. So like I'm like, that's my niche, and so I don't need to be, or I don't like desire to be quite as nuanced. In like some of my teaching, even though I teach, but I want the average person who's just like a gym rat that wants to get better to be able to go in. I mean, he does that too. I'm just saying, but their focus is more towards, hey, how can we give trainers like the highest level of education?
So it's honestly been the biggest pleasure chatting with you today on our podcast. And to wrap up, can you give our listeners and viewers, because we are going to post this on YouTube as well, more information about where they can find more information about you, your teaching, your education, your social media pages, anything like that? Where can people reach you?
Well, I mean, I don't know. By the time this hits, I may not have any social media left.
Don't jinx it.
Just put your email up. Share your email.
Just like you can email me. Like if you want to know stuff, just like shoot emails at me at this. But like you can't find me anywhere on social media because I said too much about vaccines or COVID or whatever by that point. But right now, like my backup account is up, and that's Coach Paul Carter. But my main account, Lift from Bang, which is I got over 100,000 followers, which they keep taking down. That one has been the one that's been around forever. However, they ding me for just about anything that I put up or say now. So I don't know if it'll get restored again at this point or not. But that's why I keep the backup account now. And people can usually just find me there. And pretty much I run all my business through like my Instagram, because Facebook is worthless for business anymore for the most part. It's absolutely worthless. So Instagram's still pretty good for business. I'm hoping that we see a transition, Dane, I'm sure you do too, at some point in the future where we have another platform that is just as popular that we can still run business off of, because I know that'll happen at some point in the future. But I may end up starting a YouTube channel too, because with
YouTube, I mean, look, we've definitely spent a lot of effort the last few years building up our email lists, to circumnavigate kind of, and especially the last year, any of this social stuff. YouTube, I think YouTube in particular, like, for education content, like when you're putting out stuff that's providing value for free, like, look at John Call, the type of stuff and how big his profile's grown. He's gone from like putting out kind of, like random pranking stuff to like, quite broad education information, like in a broad sense, and has built such a big following off that. So, but it's hard, like with the social stuff these days, you got to watch your tongue, right? You got to, sometimes not be yourself, not be yourself, and it's hard when that's not.
Yeah, don't be yourself. That
when that's not you.
Like watching my tongue that's never been my strong forte. So I can't see that changing. So like I said, if you can find me at Coach Paul Carter, you might, I don't know by the time this hits, if I get my old account back. It's been deactivated twice now, so maybe third time. I have a girl that works to get it back, so I'm hoping I'll get it back. But if not, that's life. That's a lesson for people to learn too. When my account got blown up, I mean, you think to yourself, wow, I've built up a multi-million-dollar business off a particular account, and now it's gone. And so I literally, here's the thing, you can't, I didn't have a meltdown. I didn't freak out. I was like, well, I guess I'll go create another account. And I created another account and I hit up my buddies and I said, can you just let people know where to find me? And that was it.
Yeah.
You will never, ever solve a problem in your life with anxiety and worry. You just have to make a choice and step into it.
Yep.
And that's another thing. I would give anybody another life lesson through this, which there's been lots of good ones already. Probably
Look,
me too,
I
Dave.
can already see the we're talking about a lot of things. Men's mental health, life lessons for PTs. This is a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one is nothing in your life gets resolved from worry or anxiety. So you have to decide in that moment, literally. And I was with my fiance, like when that happened, it got blown up, and she like had a meltdown, and she's like, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm just going to create another account and grow that one." And she was like, for 2 days, she's like, "I would be having a meltdown right now." I'm like, "How does that fix anything?" Yeah. I was like, how would that fix anything? And she's like, I've never seen anybody so calm. She's like, your whole business was through that. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, so I'll just go create another one and I'll tell everybody this is where I'm at. And so that's what I did. And if there's any one thing, I think that was another thing, getting through all the hard periods, right? You should end up learning that at some point. It's like, I didn't accomplish anything through that worry. And I remember the pastor one time at this sermon, and then I'll try to let you guys off. I have so many I could give. We'll have to do it again, Dane. So he said 99% of the things that we worry about in our mind never actually come to fruition.
100%.
And that stuck with me so hard. I was like, I remember thinking right when he said it, I was like, that's not true. And then as I said, I was like, wow, that kind of, at least it feels true, because so many of the things that we worry about that rob us of our energy, they never even happen.